Hey, and welcome back to your number one source for cozy gaming and design content. I'm Nick, and today's video is going to be about, as you've probably already surmised, the Fallout TV show. There will be spoilers in this video, so if you haven't seen the show, I highly recommend you go watch it, however you get your hands on it, before watching this video, if you care about spoilers. So, let's jump in. Before we start, I should put my biases out right up front. I love all the Bethesda Fallout games. Yes, even 76. I know, controversial. And while there are a lot of very valid critiques about the Bethesda-developed Fallout games, they are still some of the first real video games I ever played, and while I definitely have my own personal tier list with New Vegas right up there at the top, I just want to put out there that yes, this video is from the perspective of a Fallout fan, not a film buff or story critic. I'm here to talk about something that I love, and hopefully you enjoy that. So let's go. The first thing I want to do is give you all a bit of an intro to the concept of Fallout. For those of you unfamiliar, Fallout is a video game franchise with a long and storied history. They began as top-down isometric PC games from a small dev who really understood the story and mechanics. Now, it could be argued that these first few Fallout games were lacking on the technical side and could do with a bit of polishing, but if you're willing to push past their shortcomings, a lot of people swear by these being the best in the franchise. Now, eventually, as all good things seem to be, the IP was bought by Bethesda, a AAA game developer most known at this point for their Elder Scrolls franchise. This brought Fallout into the third dimension and into a first-person view. The first game Bethesda made after acquiring the rights to Fallout was Fallout 3. This is the Fallout game I have the least experience with, and perhaps that's for the best. It's widely maligned as the worst Fallout game and emblematic of Bethesda's inability to skillfully adapt the franchise. At this point, anyway. Now, it was received pretty well by game critics at the time, though games journalism was still pretty young and was lacking in a lot of ways, analysis and critique skills chief among those, so the far more accurate reviews and critiques wouldn't come until later, or on obscure fan forums from the time. The general consensus is that Fallout 3 just kinda takes a big ol' shit on everything the original games were. They take away almost all the player's actual real choice and instead railroad you into an extremely linear story with almost no way to actually affect the outcome. On top of that, the characters seemingly lack any semblance of motivation, and it doesn't take more than a couple lines in conversation to either convince them to abandon their life's work or turn on their most trusted allies. And not to mention the extremely lackluster morality system of, do you want to kill someone or not? Overall, it's just not a great game. However, it does improve on the previous entries in a pretty important way, at least if you're anything like me. See, I like the Fallout games, sure, somewhat for their story, but also, and this is key, mostly for their wacky world. In every entry I've played, with the exception of Fallout New Vegas, after I leave the vault, I just go off on my own and find my own fun exploring this interesting post-apocalypse. And sure, maybe I stumble onto some story content here or there, but that really isn't the main focus for players like me. Generally speaking, I treat most Fallout games as I would treat a survival crafting game. I'm plopped into this cool world and find my own fun while trying to make the coolest character possible so the sick cinematic action slow-mo looks as cool as possible. And for that, most of Bethesda's RPGs are great, really, but you can only do that for so long. And I found as I get older and as I have less time for games, I don't find that gameplay as compelling. Because sure, I could do exactly that the way that I did in high school, but I always have this nagging feeling that I should be doing something more productive. And while the mindset that your hobbies don't bring you money, all they bring you is Joy? Ew, what the f***? Why would you waste your time on that? Get grinding, man. Is definitely one that I would like to explore. We won't get into that in this video. Functionally, this feeling of always having something more important to do leads me to gravitating more towards games that have aspects that general society would value more than, I don't know, it's fun to explode raiders. Things like artistic expression or things that explore philosophical concepts in new and interesting ways. And that brings me to Fallout New Vegas. Probably the best Fallout game, if not one of the best games ever made. This game really sets the bar for what fans want out of a Fallout game, and Fallout as a franchise. It was a full 180 from Fallout 3, and it brought with it a lot of changes that made it as amazing as it is still to this day. Now, notably, this game wasn't made by Bethesda, it was developed by Obsidian, and so that's probably most of the reason why it was so much better in the eyes of fans. They seemed to really understand what Fallout was, and really knew how to explore those more philosophical concepts and ideas, while still giving you the really interesting and fun exploration that the Fallout franchise is so great for. But this isn't a Fallout game video, this is a Fallout TV show video, so I promise there isn't much more background before we actually get to talking about the show. Just indulge me. So after the absolute masterpiece that is Fallout New Vegas, we got Fallout 4 and Fallout 76. Fallout 4 is in many ways a step back. A lot of what made Fallout New Vegas incredible is missing from Fallout 4, and they were clearly leaning more towards the open world appeal of the franchise rather than the story and philosophical potential. However, this was when the visual language and the overall feel of the franchise really solidified. Much of the imagery people associate with Fallout was not created by, but more finalized by Fallout 4. A lot of that is probably due to the graphical leap over previous entries, but it also takes a major step in terms of actual design language. Previous games certainly had their own, but it always varied from game to game, and while the general formal elements stayed the same, they always got a bit of a new twist whenever we got a new game. The vaults are a great example of this. In previous games, they were fairly sterile and pretty muted in their tones. Now, it was always implied that they were more vibrant in their heyday, but most of that never really came through in the games. You kind of just assumed they looked nicer and less dingy before, you know, the end of the world. In Fallout 4, however, we got the personality from the vaults that was previously missing, and we really got a sense of the kind of twisted undertones coming through in the design itself. I won't get too much into all these specifics, but suffice it to say there's a distinct difference between the pre-Fallout 4 aesthetic and the post-Fallout 4 one. And that carried over into probably the most hated Fallout game to date, the infamous Fallout 76. With Fallout 76, Bethesda decided to make an attempt at a Fallout MMORPG, or massively multiplayer online RPG. I would argue this wasn't actually a fundamentally bad idea. After all, they did have some pretty good success with Elder Scrolls Online. It was just a monumentally bad execution. It was incredibly buggy on release, with a serious lack of actual content and a huge microtransaction problem. And on top of all the technical reasons it was a garbage fire, on release, there were no NPCs. Like, literally none. The most you got was a robot to spit some exposition at you, or a voice log here or there. This was a far cry from the direction fans wanted the Fallout series to go, and with expectations through the roof before release, it absolutely flopped. However, I really liked it. I liked playing it on release. I didn't run into too many bugs, and frankly, it scratched the itch I had to wander around a wasteland finding new f***ed up stories and fighting off new mutants. And the base building was hugely improved over the one in Fallout 4, so frankly, I was a happy camper. And now, after like 7 years, they've added a lot of things people wanted. They fixed a lot of the performance issues, and ultimately it's a much better, way more enjoyable game. And they even have NPCs now. But more relevant to what we're talking about, this game is where we see that solidification I was talking about. The Vault looks thematically consistent with Fallout 4, and so do the Vault suits, weapons, and all the different attire worn by the different factions. Now for some, this might be signifying a decline in creativity by the teams behind these games, And while in many ways, sure, I would agree, generally I'm not in favor of a formulaic approach to design, and while I do think the world needs to be consistent, I don't think they need to go full Star Wars with every little detail being meticulously checked by continuity experts. I like it when the devs have some room to play within the bounds of the existing world. But whether or not you and I agree about this approach, it certainly does make it perfect for a TV adaptation. See, I told you we'd get there. Eventually. Okay, so now we're finally at the show. The most recent piece of Fallout media. It takes place in California around 200 years after the bombs dropped. We follow Lucy, a resident of Vault 33, on a mission to save her dad from a raider who infiltrated her vault and kidnapped him for unknown reasons. We also follow Maximus, a member of the Brotherhood of Steel, on his own mission for the Brotherhood, which brings him into contact with Lucy. And our third protagonist, a ghoul bounty hunter, who was alive pre-war and is after the same MacGuffin as Maximus, which Lucy just kinda happens upon and inconveniently needs for her own quest. This is, I think, where the show shines. Yes, the production value is great. All the little callbacks and Easter eggs are done incredibly tastefully and only really register if you've played the Fallout games. Otherwise, they just feel like a natural part of the world. And I'll talk about that in a second. I think the reason so many people who have never played Fallout like this show is because, well, it's because of a lot of reasons, but one of the most important, I think, is the focus on characterization and the balance that they have between characterization and awesome action set pieces. Where I think the Halo show failed, and correct me if I'm wrong because I haven't really watched it, but from what I gather from reviews, what they got wrong is that the show was basically just trying to adapt the game one for one. And if you're adapting a game that's mostly just action with like 2 or 3 cutscenes at most, you're not going to have a very interesting or compelling show without changing it up pretty drastically. I think Fallout avoided this issue pretty well. They certainly did give fans plenty to Leonardo DiCaprio point at, but also, more importantly, they made characters that people care about and want to keep watching and learn more about. I think Cooper is a great example of this. The opening shots show him pre-war performing at a children's party, and even in this relatively short opener, we get a lot of intrigue into Cooper. We hear from the people at the party that Cooper is divorced and used to be a film star, but also, there's clearly a lot of animosity towards him by the fathers. So we're left wondering, why? What did he do? Who is this guy, and why won't he give a simple thumbs up? And for those of us who played the games and are familiar with the source material, wait, he's the Vault Boy? Then we get an amazing bombs dropping moment and cut to 200 years later with the start of Lucy's story. There are immediate thematic links between Lucy and the Cooper that we just saw, with them both wearing similarly colored outfits, and we see Vault Tech propaganda posters and bobbleheads and other imagery with the Vault Boy doing the thumbs up, so we can link that to Cooper's previous scene. And that's just the opening couple of minutes. Right from the get-go, there is a lot of intrigue packed into this show, and this kind of thing is consistent throughout the show. I won't get into all the little things, because I do think they are a lot more enjoyable to find for yourself, but believe me, this show doesn't let up. After being introduced to Lucy and getting some amazingly gory action, and a bit of espionage, we cut to our next character, Maximus. Maximus is immediately introduced as an underdog. The first we see of him, he's being beaten up, but this doesn't just serve to characterize Maximus, it also tells us about the faction that he's a part of. You don't need to be a longtime Fallout fan to understand the general vibe of the Brotherhood. The next scene, we see Maximus in what appears to be a classroom, learning about different technology. We then see him get a question wrong and get smacked by his teacher in the nose, specifically because the teacher knows that will hurt him more because he just got punched in the face. Aside from the obvious militaristic tone that this scene gives, we also just get a lot of characterization from the scenery. This class is taking place in an old hangar, and everyone's dressed in what looks like military attire, calling back to the cutthroat environment of Top Gun visually, though with an interesting twist of religion in the teacher's attire. This is a great example of one of the show's other greatest strengths, storytelling through set design. So much of the game's storytelling is done through its environments and world building, and I think the show did a great job translating that over to TV. Everywhere we go has a distinct personality and visual style, they do a pretty good job avoiding the Planet of Hat trope when it comes to the scenery. A lot of post-apocalypse shows just kind of give you a barren and boring wasteland, but not Fallout. That's one of the things that's really great about the games. There are all these interesting places to go and factions to meet. The world may have suffered a huge blow, but it's far from dead. It's right in the name, Fallout. It doesn't only refer to the on-the-nose interpretation, but also the fact that the whole point of these games is to explore the social fallout of nuclear war. Fallout worlds are above all thriving, and this show did a great job showing that, particularly with one of these show's big twists, the fall of Shady Sands. Shady Sands is used in the show to comment on the nature of war and exemplify one of the franchise's most iconic lines.
And I am afraid. For myself. For my wife. For my infant son. Because if my time in the army taught me one thing, it's that war never changes.
Even after seeing the death and destruction caused by the nukes and wars of the past, the people in power in this world still continue to wage petty war over territory, and going full scorched earth is still somehow seen as a viable option. A parallel that lines up pretty well with our world and the fact that we literally called World War I the war to end all wars. And I think this is one of the big reasons this show succeeded where others like Halo failed. It didn't just adapt the game directly to TV. It took the themes and ideas of the game and explored them in a way that TV really excels at. I would argue personally that games are probably one of the best mediums for storytelling, period, but a close second, as somebody with dyslexia, is film and TV. Few things can make you feel the way that a TV show and a movie can. And a fair bit of that comes from the inherently believable and tactile nature of the medium. Now, yes, you can certainly get that in other mediums, and there is so much subjectivity to this entire argument, but for me at least, I find myself feeling much more viscerally affected by TV shows and movies, even more than games in a weird way. There's just something so much more compelling, I think, about seeing another human experiencing certain things. For the most part, I don't get affected by pain and suffering in video games nearly the same way as I do in film and TV. Sure, there's the odd game like The Last of Us or Hellblade, which will affect me for a myriad of different reasons, but it's nothing like the feelings I get from seeing actual real people experiencing those things, even if I know it's fake, because there's always that twinge of, well, I mean, it could, and in some cases has happened to someone. And I think a lot of that comes from me finding it easier to suspend my disbelief when I see actual real humans getting fake hurt, or experiencing any range of emotions, regardless of the fact that I know that I'm watching an actor. And I don't want to sound like I'm saying games can't tell compelling stories or aren't as engaging as other more traditional media. That's certainly not the case. But I do think they are considered separate for a reason, and that's not to say one is better than the other. On the whole, if I had to pick between a great game story and a great TV show or movie, I would pick the game every time. But that's not true for everyone, so not just letting these stories get stuck behind the barrier to entry that the gaming world has is important. And I think more game adaptations will be great for gaming as a whole. I think it will help a lot of people see the merits of games for storytelling, and even philosophy in a way that's usually reserved for more legacy media. But all that's to say, I think this show succeeds where it does because it takes that approach. It knows the strengths that TV has as a format, and how to use serialized media to its advantage to build suspense and intrigue. And I think they did a great job being efficient with the considerable runtime that TV affords. All in all, it's just a damn well-made show, and it never feels like you get a filler episode or like something or someone was there just to take up time. Everything feels purposeful and intentional, and I really hope the success of this show shows networks that games are possible to adapt well. You just need to care about what you're adapting. And I hope that we get more of these kinds of adaptations. and that it leads more people to check out a game they may not have, or even get into gaming at all. However, it's not perfect, and I do have a few minor criticisms. For one, I think while I generally love their approach to the post-apocalypse, I do think they fall into the pessimistic spectacleization of the post-apocalypse trap that most post-apocalypse media falls into, and saying that everybody in this world is terrible and out to get you, except for a select few. The example that most comes to mind for this is when Lucy and Maximus are crossing the bridge on the way to Shady Sands, and they run into a couple of fiends. I think this was a great opportunity to show some humanity in the world. I understand the urge to name drop a faction and give us some cool VATS-esque action, but I think this scene would have been much more impactful if Lucy's optimism and trust in people was rewarded, and they were able to pass totally unharmed, or even got some help because she trusted them. Because, and I think this goes for most of the show, I think the overall message gets a bit garbled. The whole show seems to be criticizing the rich and powerful, and capitalism as a system, which is rich coming from Amazon. But in the actual world that's portrayed, it's the people that you need to be afraid of. And that's even the case with Vault 4. Vaults are a symbol of the excess and privilege of the elites of pre-war society. And making them good, actually, in the only other vault that we see, I think mixes up the message. Now, it's not a perfect criticism. I'm aware that the dwellers there now aren't the same ones that were there originally, but I think from a symbolic perspective, it muddies the waters. Plus, and I'm just thinking about this now, it also feels a little bit like oppressor apologist-y to have all the Vault people in Vault 4 commingling with the descendants of the people who experimented on them. I don't know, it just feels a little bit weird. There is a reason that vaults in the game were always so horrific. They were meant to undermine your previously held trust in pre-war society. These things that were supposed to be these safe havens away from the post-apocalypse, little time capsules from the safe and civilized pre-war society, always turn out to be horrible experiments imposed by the elites of the past. Overall, I think my main issue with the show can be boiled down to the fact that it was funded by Amazon. It was impossible for them to truly criticize the system they were attempting to talk about, because they were quite literally under the boot of it the whole time that they were making the show. I have no doubt that the creators and people behind the actual creation of the show, not just the funding, wanted to say something a bit more salient about capitalism. But that's just frankly not possible when your show is, one, a huge IP owned by someone else, and dos, funded and owned by Amazon. However, none of this makes it a bad show to me. I had a great time, and I binged it over the course of a couple of days because I was so invested in the characters and the world, and everything about it was just so compelling. And as far as video game adaptations go, I think this is one of the best so far. Every piece of art is going to have issues, and it's very hard to be able to actually have an overt, salient criticism of capitalism in your show if you want more than a couple people who already know these problems to see it. I'll likely be rewatching this show a couple of times because there's just so many little Easter eggs and things that can be missed the first time around, and I always love it when a show, game, or movie lets you enjoy it multiple times and doesn't just lean on twists to keep you hooked. I highly recommend watching it if you haven't, and if you've gotten to this point and you haven't seen it, sorry for all the spoilers, but you were warned. But that's it for this video. Thank you so much for watching. If you're still here, wow, thank you so much. This was a really long one, I know. Regardless, I hope you enjoyed it. Have a great day, and as always, happy gaming.